Hi.
Live. Oh,
Yeah, hi. Hi, everyone. This is Tintin. We call her Little Tintin because we've already done an Amazing Grace series with Tintin from Myanmar. And Tintin is our World Fellow Associate, and she's at the law school at Yale. And we are very happy to spend some time chatting with her today. So, welcome.
thank you, Elsa. I'm so honored to be here.
Thank you. So, Tintin, why don't you tell us a little bit about who you are and what do you do?
Sure. Well, thank you, Elsa. First of all, guys, isn't she amazing? So, like Elsa said, I am a third-year law student at Yale Law School, and I'm one of the Associate World Fellows, which means I'm one of the grad students here at Yale. I participate in all of the conversations and dialogues with the World Fellows, bringing the American perspective, and I'm severely underqualified to be part of this group, but I'm so blessed and honored to be part of it. So I was born in China, and my family immigrated to the United States when I was about 4, and I grew up in Texas. I moved around in Texas quite a bit, but I went to high school in Dallas, and then after high school I attended the United States Military Academy at West Point for 4 years, which is in upstate New York. And after West Point, I commissioned as a second lieutenant in the United States Army, and I served for 5 years as a military intelligence officer. I served in Korea, in Texas, and deployed really briefly to Iraq and Afghanistan. And then in 2016, I left the Army and came to law school. So that's kind of a abbreviated version of my life story.
And you think that you're not qualified to be part of the Yale World Fellows group? I think with a resume like that, you definitely qualify.
Oh, thank you, Elsa.
But, this is a question I ask all my guests. Describe yourself in 3 adjectives.
Okay. 3 adjectives. Curious, I hope. Hardworking, and occasionally very silly.
That's good. And, you said you were a military intelligence officer.
Mm-hmm.
What was that like? What kind of a job is that?
Yeah, so I always...
were you a spy or something?
I don't know if you guys have seen James Bond, loosely based on my life. I'm just kidding. Entirely not as sexy as the job sounds. But I did do some really cool work. So really, at the core of what a military intelligence officer does, at least in the United States Army, is to kind of look at the landscape, see what the enemy is doing, and give courses of action to our boss. In other words, we're kind of the eyes and ears of the military commander, and we tell him, hey, the enemy's here, and here's how we should go about attacking him or her, mostly him. And so, for example, in Afghanistan, I was stationed in eastern Afghanistan in the Logar province. This was in 2014. And when a lot of what my job was identifying who were kind of the high value targets in that part of Afghanistan, looking at how the terrorist network was linked up, who was talking to whom, and through that network we figured out who were the most important nodes. And once we figured that out, we gave recommendations to the commander. This one guy in this village seems to be talking to all the right people. We think he's a big deal, so here are the options for eliminating him from the battlefield. So that's a little bit of what a military intelligence officer does. But really, my soldiers were the ones doing really cool stuff. I was just kind of there to kind of coordinate and provide leadership and management.
And what do you mean by eliminating him from the battlefield?
Ah.
Physically removing him or making him a non-entity? Right,
so that there are a variety of options. Obviously, there are the lethal options. We have an entire arsenal of weapons. That is the sad reality of war and conflict. But really, from an intelligence perspective, when we eliminate someone from the battlefield lethally, we don't get any intelligence from that person, right? We drop a bomb on them, this individual is eliminated, but we don't know what's on his or her computer. We don't know who he talks to or his network. We don't know where he's from and the motivations behind why he chose to join this terrorist group. So really, our most valuable way of eliminating a target is to detain or capture this individual and gain more intelligence and more information from this target. And that's how we fuel this intelligence cycle. So we identify someone, we detain them, we get more information, and that leads us to other individuals who are of interest to us.
And I know in the Good Society seminar, we had a whole session with you and another fellow on military operations and conflict, as in like war. And from what I got from that session was you actually work towards creating peace.
Absolutely.
So, it's like very contradictory. So can you explain a little bit about like how do you contribute towards peace?
So I think it was Clausewitz. I think Emma brought this up in class. A famous German political theorist, Clausewitz, once said that war is an extension of politics. And when you think about that, war is just a tool to achieve your political aims. And for many countries who are embroiled in war, the ultimate aim is peace. And as much as we would like to be able to say that countries can just talk at the table and, have a friendly kumbaya to resolve conflicts, unfortunately, that's not always the case. And so when you think about at this tactical level, you have a mission, and everything is that we do and prepare for us towards that mission. And when you kind of elevate this to the strategic level, the war of goal is ultimately peace. No soldier really wants to continue fighting. We want to come home to our healthy and safe families and society. So I think soldiers more than anybody else want to achieve peace, which is the ultimate goal of war.
So why did you join the military? What was your motivation?
That's a great question, Elsa. I actually get that a lot because I don't think there are a lot of people who look like me.
Exactly. And when someone looks at you, you don't actually fit the ideal stereotype of a soldier or a military personnel.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's something that I've really struggled with throughout my military career. So I was first inspired to join the military. Actually, I think my journey began at Yale. I participated in what was called the Young Global Scholars program. It was like a summer nerd program at Yale, and one of the speakers who came to speak to us was a West Point graduate, and he was so handsome. My husband still gets jealous when I tell this story. I don't know who this guy is anymore. I don't remember his name and have not been in touch, but he was a captain in the Army, a West Point graduate, and he flew helicopters, and on the day of 9/11, he flew Dick Cheney from White House to a secret hiding hole, and he did all these cool missions in the mountains of Afghanistan, eliminating the Taliban. Anyways, that kind of planted the seed for me, and I think growing up as a young immigrant, I love America. I knew I wanted to give back somehow, and I couldn't really figure out how. But when I met this individual, I saw that serving in the military was one way of giving back to my adopted country. I was able to give back. I was able to do something exciting while I was still young and learn a whole set of skills that I think it would have been hard to learn anywhere else. When I first told my parents that I wanted to join, they were pretty resistant. In China, there's a saying that roughly translates to, you don't use good metal and make nails out of it. And similarly, good sons and daughters don't become soldiers. So in China, it's not seen as something that children from good educated families do. So my parents took a while to come around to it, but I think they eventually realized the value of not only the education I got at West Point, but also the true value of service.
West Point Military Academy. You see that all the time in the movies, and it's like a zone full of testosterone.
Yes, absolutely.
What was it like for you as a woman, as a Chinese woman, as a petite woman?
It was definitely tough. I really struggled to figure out where I fit in, how me as one puzzle piece fit into this whole picture, right? I mean, the history of West Point is mostly written by, big barrel-chested, square-jawed, deep-voiced white men. Our statues and buildings are named after General Douglas MacArthur and George Washington. I at first couldn't quite figure out how I fit into that mold. And eventually I realized that leadership is something that's very, very personal, and you need to figure out your own mode of leadership. But the basic lessons about, caring for your subordinates, trying to achieve the mission, and being respectful of people's opinions and positions, those fundamentals of leadership, it doesn't matter if you're male or female, white or black or yellow.
Is that like yellow? Like,
yeah.
I find it ridiculous. I find it ridiculous when they, have all these colors and I'm supposed to be brown as well. So it's like really weird.
Not exactly a perfect representation of exactly what color I am. But nonetheless, the message stands that, there are fundamental aspects of leadership that everyone, that apply to everybody. And figuring out how to deliver that is something very personal.
And you were in charge of a platoon in South Korea, right?
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about that, and how did you manage those men?
Yeah. So it was actually a platoon of men and women, and this is. Let me caveat this by saying that it was a very unique mission in the military. I had kind of a strange job. So I was the platoon leader for the 2nd Infantry Division Taekwondo demonstration team, which means I had about 20 or 30 soldiers, some of them American and some of them were Katusas, Korean augmentees to the United States Army, who are serving in the Korean military but are augmented and integrated with the United States military.
So you had a mixed team of American and Korean.
American and Korean, and men and women. And what we did was we performed Taekwondo all around the South Korean peninsula as almost a gesture of goodwill to the Korean population. Like, hey, we're here kind of occupying your country, but look at this, we've learned your national sport, right? And everyone, just to remind everyone, I'm actually Chinese, not Korean. And I actually didn't know any Taekwondo when I got there, but I took a lot of lessons and eventually got my black belt. Anyway, so this was my first job in the Army.
And how old were you?
I was 22.
You were 22 and you were managing a platoon of how many people?
Of about 20 or 30 people.
Okay.
And on my first day, literally everybody in my platoon had more experience in the military than I did, which is really daunting. My platoon sergeant, who's kind of my left-hand man, he had been in the military for something like 14 years, great guy. But I was technically his boss. He saluted me and called me ma'am, but he had so much more experience than I did, and it was a really humbling experience.
And was it hard for him to accept you as his boss?
No, because he was a freaking professional. I realized that my position as a second lieutenant and as a platoon leader is not just about me, it's about my rank and what that stands for. And for me, every day I woke up wanting to not only deserve that rank, but deserve the respect from my soldiers, and realizing that leadership is not just about commanding and telling people what to do, but it's about respecting people and listening to what they have to say. And especially in that position, everybody knew more than I did, but I realized that my role as a leader was to coordinate and facilitate and empower them so that we as a team could complete the mission.
And, when you did your stint in Afghanistan, what was the one highlight from that mission?
Gosh, the situation in Afghanistan is obviously tricky. I think it was, I don't know if it was so much the mission as it was just getting to work with my team. I was only there for 4 months because the unit that I was with does very short rotations, very short deployments. So they deploy for 4 months out of the year, come back, and then deploy the next year for about 4 or 5 months. So in my 4 months there, I worked with a really amazing, dedicated group of people, some military uniformed service members and a lot of civilians, and just to see everybody pulled away from their families and their loved ones and their entire lives back in the United States to come support this mission was really inspiring, and realize that, there's a lot of good people out there who want to do good. And yeah, I think that was the best part, is working with my fellow soldiers and the people on my team who I was deployed with.
And after working with the military for how many years?
5 years.
5 years, you decided to come back to the Yale Law School?
I did, yeah.
And what drove that decision? Why did you want to come back and pursue legal studies?
Sure. During my time in the military, I saw both the incredible power of what can be accomplished with military might, but I also saw very starkly the limitations. I think the military is really powerful for affecting intense short-term change. But if you want to impact longer-term change, you have to use other tools. And I think the law is one very, very powerful tool. A big issue that I saw in war-torn countries was that there were no rule of law, right? There was no way institutionally of achieving justice, which is why people feel disenfranchised, which is why, not to distill insurgencies in terms of just like justice, access to justice, but lack of access to justice is what perpetuates violence and crime and a lot of really unfortunate things. So I realized that I didn't have enough in my toolkit to achieve what I wanted to achieve, these kind of long-term goals of peace and stability. But I wanted to learn another tool, which was the law. And what better place to do that than the Yale Law School, where I get to meet incredible people like Elsa.
And me, you. But, I wanted to ask you, the Yale Law School is actually quite historic, right? I mean, you have so many presidents who've come off from there, and now you have a Supreme Court justice who's recently been nominated, and his nomination was accepted to the Supreme Court. But you also had people like Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton, right?
Yeah.
So what is it like to study in such an esteemed college?
Yeah, it is such a privilege. Obviously, like any institution, the law school has its...
Is it intimidating?
It is very intimidating. It's really... No institution is perfect, but I am so impressed by the quality of people that I've met at the law school who are not only brilliant, kind of beyond my wildest dreams, but they're also really good people who want to do good things. And a lot of times we don't always agree on how to achieve, how we go about doing these good things, but I think the vast majority of my classmates are interested in pursuing social justice and good.
And part of that, was also staging in Sitins during the Supreme Court hearing. So why don't you explain to the people watching, what that felt like, how did it come about, and y'all got Yale to also concede a few things, right?
Yeah, so just a little bit of context. Elsa was referring to the recent confirmation process, recent confirmation hearings and process of now Justice Kavanaugh, who was not only a graduate of Yale University as an undergrad, Yale College, but he also attended the law school. And his confirmation hearing was very contentious. He's obviously right of center, a bit conservative, and the law school tends to lean very, very, very left. So that was one issue. A lot of people at the law school disagreed with his policies and, were afraid of what would happen to what kind of rulings that he would make when he was confirmed to the Supreme Court. And also later in the process, he was accused of sexual misconduct by a woman that he had known in his high school days. And so when he was first announced, before the kind of sexual misconduct things came up, the law school issued a letter of support for Kavanaugh, then Judge Kavanaugh, which the law school does pretty uniformly for any of our graduates who are nominated to the Supreme Court, just a standard like, hey, he's came to our law school, we're really proud of him, he is a great judge, etc. And then as the sexual misconduct came out, a lot of students came out and said, why are we supporting him? It was, why are we supporting a guy who's, one, legal jurisprudence a lot of the students disagree with, but two, someone who's accused of sexual misconduct. And regardless of how you feel about it, I was really, really impressed by the activism of the students. We a lot of the students, I myself didn't participate because I got married that week, so I was preoccupied by personal things.
But you would have otherwise.
Yeah, I think I would have at least supported or attended. I think a lot of the students staged sit-ins. Many of the students went down to Washington D.C. and protested on Capitol Hill, made statements to the public. It was really, really inspiring to see students kind of come together in support of an issue that really deeply affected a lot of them and that they felt very personally invested in. So it was a kind of social activism that obviously I didn't experience a lot of in the military because that was not okay to do.
You don't protest against your bosses or the management, right?
We don't, for a whole host of reasons. But I think this was, for me, really inspiring and really just interesting to see a new method of voicing political concerns.
Yeah. And what's next for you? Now that you've had, at a very young age, quite a varied experience in the military, you're back in school, and that to the Yale Law School, which is one of the top universities in the world. What do you plan to do next?
Good question. So I graduate next May, and I will be going to DC. I'll be working at a law firm for a few years. I'm going to be working for a district court judge in DC. And then after that, I'm not really sure.
Will you stand for office?
Run for office? Very unlikely.
It's a historic moment
It
where
is,
many women have been elected into various positions of power, and I think people like you should definitely
thank you, Elsa.
run for office.
Thank you. I will maybe take that into consideration later. First, I've got to pay off my student loans, get some work experience. So I think ultimately I'm interested in national security law and policy. I'm really intrigued by questions of under what circumstances our country goes to war, and once we go to war, what are the constraints, right? So those are the kind of general issues I'm interested in, and ultimately I think I would eventually like to end up back in public service, because I think that my contributions to this country are not over. I want to continue that service, but remains to be seen how I do that. So yeah, we'll see.
What would be your message to the young girls watching this session?
Yeah, I think my message is to figure out for yourself what you want to do. For me, growing up in a very kind of strict Asian family, my parents had a really, elaborate plan for what I think they wanted me to do. And I did, frankly, very little of that, but still feel that I have achieved a certain level of success. And I think that was because I followed my passions, and I figured out what I wanted to do, and tried to achieve that. Everyone's journey through life and through leadership and through their own careers is a deeply personal one. And although we can look at the kind of our mentors and important figures who've come before us as a map for guidance, but ultimately our path is our own. And I encourage every one of you to think really deeply about what inspires you, what makes you want to get up in the morning and go pursue that. And don't let anybody tell you no, and don't let anybody dictate that path.
On that positive note, I'd like to thank you for, sparing some time for us in your busy schedule. And I know, this is the end of term. Everybody's working hard towards completing their assignments and preparing for exams. So thank you very much, and all the very best to you.
Thank you. And guys, thank you to Elsa for being such an inspiration to me, and I'm sure many, many other young women watching this. So thank you so much, Elsa.
Thanks
to everyone.